Good evening, everybody. Thank you for attending this latest webinar. I'm pleased to have an ex-colleague on this evening to talk to us about grazing. I'll introduce our speaker shortly. Just the usual things, really. We will be recording. The recording will be available afterwards. A bit different from the previous webinar. It's going to be a little bit more interactive between our speaker and myself, and also more than happy to take questions. So they are being fielded, and I will get some of the questions through also. So yeah, if you do have a question during, if you pop it in the chat, we will try and answer that if we can as we go along. And yeah, at the end we'll also open up for more questions at the end as well, if you'd prefer to wait until the end of the webinar. So thank you again for joining and making the effort. I'd like to introduce Brian O'Riordan. Brian and I have worked together, and yeah, is lots of fun and has got lots of stories and tips and general things to help you on in life. So it'd be really nice to prize some of them out of Brian this evening. Just a bit of background: Brian farms in Southern Ireland, so as you'll find out, he does do 2 jobs, which is pretty impressive. I can only manage 1. And the first one, which is I guess the priority in many ways, is the dairy farm that he runs at home with his wife and 3 girls. It's a pure grazing system, so that's obviously why we've got Brian talking to us this evening. It's not a system where cows just go out. This is a pure grazing one, and Brian feels he's doing well, he's probably a bit more humble. We've seen the numbers, and he's doing a fantastic job of maximising everything he can from grass, and is attaining a 51 cent a litre milk price at the moment, and that is literally pretty much from grass. Brian himself, as well as running the farm, and he's the 4th generation farmer there, he's also working full-time, believe it or not, for Lely, which is where we've worked together in the past. And he's done a few international roles for Lely, and he's currently the general manager of a Lely centre in Southern Ireland. So approximately about 5 years Brian's been with Lely, and in that role has travelled the world, and not just in the capacity of learning and teaching about grazing, but in all capacities as well. So he has a very broad knowledge base, which we want to prize out of him today. Brian, as we learned in the last webinar with Chad, he went through the process, Chad, of choosing to go robotic. Brian did the same, and it was 2017 that he put the robot in, and we'll learn a little bit about that as well. And yeah, from his experience, he's had a really varied working career. So obviously brought up on a farm and farming now. Previously has farmed and worked over in Australia, and also for a number of years in Saudi Arabia, Almarai, which at the time and probably or possibly still is one of the world's largest, highest yielding farms, with huge cattle numbers, which I can't even imagine what it must be like. So we'll maybe get a bit of that as well this evening, which will be really interesting. And then in a previous life, he was representing Audi, so has seen it from the other side on the retail side, and also representing a premium brand too. So hopefully some of that will come through this evening. The main focus is on grazing. So I will now hand over to Brian. We'll go to the first slide, and over to you, Brian, to introduce us to your farm and what you're achieving there.
Yeah, hi Laurence, and I hardly recognise myself in the introduction. In a way, and I just want to stress to everybody that I did not write the title of how I run a successful intensive. It's moderately successful. We're trying to be more successful every day, and it's intensive insofar as my stocking, etc., etc. It's quite a small farm. I suppose it's kind of typical in Ireland. 65, 70 cows would be fairly typical. The Irish farming scene at the moment, you've got kind of smaller farmers like myself, which would be on the lower end, 65, 70 cows up. And like for that kind of operation, there's a lot of part-time farmers in that. So there's a lot of guys working very hard, holding down 2 jobs. My wife also works as well. So when you said I'm farming, my wife, she's a midwife, so she's quite a busy job as well. So you know what we want is a very labor efficient operation. So just to go through it, I have 65. Depending, numbers could fluctuate. I have a bit of a TB issue at the moment. I have between 65 and 70 cows on a 22 hectare, 55 acre grazing farm. So I've stocked in around 3 cows, 3.1, 3.2 cows to the hectare. And we can get into a little bit about that later on, because one of the questions I get asked is, how many cows can I run on a grazing platform, etc. And there's several aspects to that, and I suppose it's all down to what you're growing. So we talk about that maybe later on. We get into that.
Great.
My 2021 performance, and again we go through the figures that I don't know how they look to people. They're figures I need to grow, etc. So I do 230 days of grazing. So my turnout is normally around this time of the year, March. I started grazing actually yesterday, first few days out. I'm in a slightly heavier part of Ireland, and I'll get into that in a second. My land is on the slightly heavy side. It's kind of, some of it is blackish in nature, you know, gets wet quickly, you know, and dries out pretty quickly as well. My yield per cow at the moment is about 6,300 litres. I'm in around that, and I'm trying to build on that through genetics. Last year, my average butterfat was 4.26%, average protein 3.48%, and we'll go into how that affects the herd in the next slide, I think. And I'm doing at the moment 487 kgs of butterfat. And because we're grazing here, we normally do block calving. So we're in the middle of calving at the moment. And last year, the 6-week calving rate of 95%. It's going to be less this year because I use a bit of sex semen, but again, we might mention that later on.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the setup of the farm.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
So yeah, why grass?
Why grass?
Yeah. And look, grass is only, we're grazing in Ireland. It's predominantly grazing in Ireland, and it always has been. I've worked a good bit with Lely in the UK, and I know there's a lot of indoor systems in the UK, and I'm definitely not here to system bash, or I'm definitely not here to say that one system is better than the rest. You must use a system that suits yourself, your farm, your cow type, etc. And like the best minds in agriculture have told me that any system can be profitable, but what's important is that you do have a system. So why grass? It's the most available product in Ireland, and if you look historically in Ireland, and especially where I am, I'm down in Cork, North Cork, which is a real intensive dairy area. And if anybody is familiar with the geography of Ireland, I'm on the Cork-Kerry kind of border area, which I don't know if that's anybody who's travelled Ireland. They might notice that the land there wouldn't be arable land. Okay, so grass is kind of probably all we can do very well. And even like, you know, sources of maize and stuff like that would be a ways away from me. So it just costs money to haul it in. So we make the most of what we have. So it's a cheap source of feed. I think grazed grass, last figures I saw was around 70 euros a ton of dry matter is what's costing grazed grass. I think I saw figures that it can be nearly twice it if you install it. I don't know about those figures, but it's a good, healthy, quality feed for cows. I mean, it's very palatable. They do like it. Reliable production for up to 8 months. Yeah, we try to get at least 8 months on grass. High nutritional value again, high in protein. Again, palatable. You know, we don't have a lot of problems with cow stomachs or rumination and all that kind of stuff. But again, we don't have these real high yielding cows anyway. So like we have a cow for the system. You know.
Yeah, so they're quite robust.
Yeah, you need a robust cow, because I mean, my biggest distance in the farm now is a small farm, so I don't go big distances. I think my farthest distance here is 800 meters, but we have larger farms in Ireland, and just for people there thinking, crikey, this guy's only 65, 70 cows. And if you haven't tuned out already, like we have farms here of, you know, 400 cows grazing in Ireland.
Right.
And, you know, the numbers of cows will stay, but the other KPIs stay the same, the 6,300 litres, to 500 kilos of milk solids, you know, and that's what we're aiming for. We're aiming for a cow that produces in or around, you know, 8% solids, and we'll go into why that is important actually later on. Processors and marketing. At the moment in Ireland, it is nearly impossible to get a milk contract if you're not fully grazing.
Right.
So so if you haven't got, well, I don't say fully grazing, if you haven't got a considerable amount of proven grazing in your herd, you'll find it hard to get a processor to take your milk. And in some instances, I've heard of processors sending milk to different factories, such as Cadbury's have a plant here in Ireland, and actually over the road from me, in a place called Rathmore in Kerry. And they take milk because a lot of our milk goes into butter. It's manufacturing milk. We have a very small liquid milk market in Ireland, and rightly or wrongly, we have a huge market share for butter worldwide. I think we're the second biggest brand of butter in the US, for instance, also Germany. And unfortunately, we went down the road of selling it as grass-fed instead of maybe just saying, because anybody who knows Irish butter, it looks great because it's lovely and yellow, and it tastes great, and maybe we just sort of should have stuck with that one instead of all our cows are grazing. So and I think the last thing is, for me it's a big labor saving. Okay, so just for people who haven't tuned out, for people who are still there, like I find when my cows are inside, you know, my workload increases. So when my cows are grazing, I don't have to maintain a cubicle. I don't have to mix feed or, you know, put out bales or whatever. I don't have to push up feed. You know, you don't have to less areas to keep clean, etc., etc. So for me, when cows are out grazing, it's a massive, massive reduction on labor.
Okay, next slide. I think that's it. Perfect.
Yeah. So I suppose if you were on about why grass, this is another reason in Ireland why we do grass, because we're paid on a constituents basis, which I think is different it's different to a lot of people in the UK. There wouldn't be many people.
No, there are, but not like this.
Yeah.
Majority, less so.
Yeah, so we're paid on an A plus B minus C system, right? So this is actually the current prices of what we're getting in or around. So the milk price, we're paid A for a kilo of protein. So it's worked out on a percentage of the volume basis. So every time my milk is collected, it's tested for protein and butterfat, and I get a reading of the percentages. So I think my percentage protein at the moment is about 3.85, 3.9 or something like that. And my butterfat then could be 4.2, 4.25 or something like that. So I get the percentages. So A is a kilo of protein plus B, which is your kilo of butterfat. And this is the bit that's crucial. We're charged in for the water content of the milk. So it's a 4 cents a litre charge. So it's essentially nearly a collection charge on the milk. So the balance most guys in Ireland and what our breeding strategies and our feeding strategies with grass is trying to do is trying to maximize the amount of kilos rather than the literage. And it's a balancing act because, you know, 3.5% of zero is zero. So, you know, you need a bit of both. So it's a fine line we walk.
And then hence why, what you need to use what you've got in front of you, and then that attractiveness of grass becomes more apparent. Yeah.
So again, there's no maize, for instance, grown, like the nearest maize to me would be maybe 15, 20 miles, you know, and that, you know, there's a lot of farmers then to go for that maize. So you might have to go 30, 40 miles to get maize. And at that, with transport prices, and it's just not economical really at that stage to be haul it in. It's much easier if you can go out in the field next door. So our focus then is to get as much off of forage as possible, get as much out of grass. So the focus is then, because I'm highly stocked, I'm stocked at 3 hectares, I might have to supplement at times of the year. So, you know, I don't get much drought where I am. It's one of the things I don't suffer from really is drought. But if there's excessive rain or at the shoulders of the year in the springtime, in the back end of the year from September on, I try to supplement with really high DMD silage.
Yeah.
So I suppose here's the, you know, grass, it's an attractive feed. Again, it's a high UFL value. Depending on weather conditions, 14 to 20% dry matter. obviously the drier is better, but you just have to deal with what you have, and you have to be. Part of grazing is you have to be reactive in certain ways, and sometimes you might have to iron out a bit of dry matter problems. And that's
how
again,
would you do that? What would be the way you get around that situation?
yeah. So like things I would do if with dry matter, you know, you be always kind of. I always be watching my cows. Rumination, even though like a lot of the systems we sell have collars on and they did have rumination, but rumination can, you know, it can be very variable on grass depending on dry matter. And you always want to keep it stuff as consistent for the cow as possible. We all know that. There's a colleague of mine, Mike Steele, and he put it best. He says 3 words endearing. He says limit, system, variability. So cows like really standard feed, etc. And that's why we have a smaller cow with maybe lesser yields that are probably less finely bred, that they can take the rough and tumble of a really wet day. You know, they can maybe a bit better locomotion, that they can walk to a different paddock if they walk a paddock farther away. So that's the things we're looking at. If I have a really wet day, you know, I might throw in a bale of straw, maybe just to slow down the room, a bit more dry matter, maybe a bale of good quality haylage or something like that, depending what's available.
Right. Okay.
You know, and again, like if it gets real bad, you just open up the cubicles and let them come in and lie down, you know, because obviously an animal has to lie down to ruminate, etc. So, you know, we do all those things. We do intervene when necessary. It's not totally. Again, protein, it's a very high protein feed. So again, when we're feeding concentrates, we'd feed a lower protein concentrate. So when I go out grazing, turn out full time, I'd switch. Like at the moment, I'm on a 17% protein nut, I think, and I would probably go down to 14, maybe even a 12, you know, during the main grazing season.
Right.
So you try to lower the protein of a cow, to, you know.
Yeah.
You don't want to overload her with protein. Again, 80% leaf stem. We can talk a little about that. I think there's a slide about quality of grass later on.
Yeah.
You know, spring grass, you know, is the highest UFL grass. I mean, cows, really, it's very important that we set up our season well. We get out early. And what you always want to do with rotation, 18 to 25 days, you're always thinking about the next rotation. So you're trying to maintain the ground. You're trying to get good, efficient graze outs. So you're growing the best quality grass all the time. So you don't want that really stemmy grass that comes through. Like, you need to leave in cows to nice leafy lush swards, that they get good graze outs, that you've got good grass coming back again. Obviously, as we said before, it's half the price of inside grass, etc. So it's all about managing your grazing platform, and it's about setting it always up for the next rotation. So typically we get about, some paddocks we can get 10 rotations, the best paddocks we have, but you'll always intervene with paddocks. You take them out for silage periodically. I top out paddocks anyway, just to keep the sward correct.
Well, before we go on to the next slide, where we want to go into the robots a little bit more, we do just have a question, Brian. Do you adjust protein by monitoring urea levels? Yeah,
well, urea levels are tested. My processors actually don't test for, but some of the processors do check for urea levels in milk. So yeah, I think it's coming down the track. But in Ireland, there's an initiative at the moment where they're encouraging farmers to feed lower protein feeds. So yeah, it's on our radar. Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, a little bit more about the robots then. About why did you go for them in the first place?
Yeah, so before this, I was making in a parlor. I think I'm making cows since I was, 12, years of age. So I had my time served in a parlor, and it came to the stage where I was working full time and I was making a parlor. Now it was easier because I was working for Lely and I saw it working well for so many people. And when I joined the business back, I'm actually 7 years with Lely. You said 5. I'm 7 years as of yesterday. With Lely. And when I joined, I actually thought, this is for indoor systems. And I thought we would be appealing to the indoor market in Ireland, and what a solution it is for those guys. And I actually, grazing on my own farm wasn't even on my radar. when I joined Lely. And I suppose I had the confidence, I had experience of indoor systems from Saudi and high yielding cows and stuff like that. And I said, like, what a fantastic, you get your milkings, extra milkings, etc. with a robot. 3 milkings, maybe 4 milkings a day. In Saudi, for instance, we used to milk 4 times a day. And I was just at the stage where I was getting a bit of burnout. I was milking cows in the morning, and I was going to work and coming home, maybe with leaf milkers, and nothing against the relief milkers I had some great guys, but reliability sometimes weren't there. You could have a great one, and they generally don't stay. They move on to something else and training people up, etc. And I just looked. I had 2 options really. Like farming part-time, especially, was not an option with a parlour. So I saw it working well on other farms, and I said, look, if it works for them, it can work for me. And if you think about why it works, and we can get into that maybe later on, how cow moves through the system, it works just as well on grazing as it does indoor. And I actually have some people in Ireland, as a colleague of ours, Jordan Malloy, and she's it is really her. You probably couldn't afford to get her here tonight. She's much more knowledgeable than I am, and she pioneered a lot of the stuff with grazing in Ireland. And she actually maintains that it works better grazing than it does indoors, and that's quite a statement.
That is a statement.
That is a big statement.
Yeah, I'm led to believe that Southern Ireland, as a percentage growth market, is the largest for Lely. Is that correct?
Yeah, you were getting. I mean, look, labour is a big problem everywhere, and that's what's tweaking people's interest. But it should be really performance. I mean, I've seen there. Like I took over, like many people, I took over the farm from my dad, and I was bang on average at the time when I started my took over the cows, when I was milking a parlour, I was bang on the Irish average at the time, which was a pretty pedestrian 4,500 litres, and about 360 or 70 kgs of milk solids. And my cows, like, now I know there's been genetic gains, obviously, but the fact that they're managing their own time, the fact that they've maybe an extra milking for the better cows, etc. They do really come on, and because it kind of forces your hand and it gives you more time to devote to getting that grass in front of the cow right, because it's very, very important when you want a voluntary milking from a cow, when you want a cow to leave a field and come, that she has the right grass and the right grazers. And we'll talk about that maybe later on. So like, I mean, what robots really do is they create the opportunity to a cow. They individualize the system for every cow. She's being fed to her yield. She has more time to manage her own time budget during the day. So be it lying down, more time ruminating, etc. And less time on their feet, not in collecting yards, so you have less lameness, etc. So even the fact that they can come in at their own pace, conserving energy, etc. It's all the little things that amount to an increase in yield. So while in Southern Ireland, labour is certainly driving it, the labour availability, but people should be really focusing on it from a performance level. And also if you talk to my wife and my 3 children, the lifestyle out of it is pretty good as well.
Right. Yeah. Excellent. Well, we'll go on in a second. We've got a couple of more questions. I think we'll probably look at maybe the differences in a nutshell between indoor and grazing. But questions are coming thick and fast, Brian. Okay. So there's definitely plenty of people still tuned in. I think you may have answered about buffer. Do you ever buffer feed to keep consistency?
Yeah, you do. Yeah. You have to. I mean, especially because I'm tightly stocked. So a lot of people in Ireland, I mean, the range of stocking in Ireland is about 2.5 cows to the hectare. I'm at about 3.1. I probably could push it to 3.2, 3.3 because I'm growing a lot of grass at the moment, so I can push it a little bit harder. I'm growing about 13 tons of dry matter per hectare at the moment, and I'm just able to push it that little bit harder. But there is times that you have to, like, because I have a small grazing block, and people have grazing blocks, so there is times of the year you have to put in a bale, and like you see it in cows' dung. If I see cows, like you're wandering around, if I see bubbles in the dung, I know, look, there could be a bit of acidosis in here, so they're going to put a fiber source in there or whatever. And when you're running out of grass, you just put the best. What you do is to manage your grass, you take out the best quality bales you can. So I always try to cut a bale at grazing stage. So they're actually eating grazed grass, just ensoiled. So you just keep the quality up like that.
Okay, fantastic. A couple of more. Two-part question. How many kilograms of concentrate is fed per cow per year? You can be thinking about that. And you know it straight away. No surprise. And what is the rough live weight of your cows?
Okay, the rough live weight of my cows is in around 600. I would be saying 650 kilos would be average live weight of the mature cow. Heifers are obviously a bit lighter.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of cow I want. I want this cow maybe 650 kilos. That'll give me maybe 6,500 liters of milk, or maybe a bit bigger. Maybe. I experiment. I'm trying to get the kind of a bit bigger cow, a bit more capacity in the udder. And obviously I used EBI or economic.
Same as PLI.
Yeah. So economic index. So I'm using as high economic merits I have. Concentrates, last year I fed 1,150 odd tons. Oh, sorry, kilos, not tons. Whoa, I did cover there in the corner. So like just 1,150 kilos is what I fed last year on average for every cow. And like the range there then could be like there's the best cows would have received maybe 2 ton, and there was cows in that received 500.
Yeah.
So I have it on a feed.
We'll do one more and then we'll move on, because we'll look at the difference, and then we'll move on to free cow traffic, etc. Apart from yourself and Mrs. O'Riordan, is there any other labour on the farm?
Yes, there is. And I'll be very honest about this. Look, you were a manager of a Lely centre at one stage, and it is it's not a job you're going to do in 40 hours, and that is for sure. So I have a guy. I'm actually very, very lucky. I have a guy who's got out of cows. He was making 40 cows. He sold his cows. He comes to me he does about between 12 and 15 hours a week for me. So he comes to me 3 days a week, and he does between 12 and 15 hours over the 3 days. And my dad is 80 years of age, and he still knocks about.
Does he?
Yeah, he does. Yeah. No, he might, he picks and chooses. So he would do. Actually, my fertilizer spraying is the job he enjoys most.
Right. Yeah, I like your style. Superb. Well, we'll move on to the
whole run without breaking something.
So if you could just quickly run through us with the difference in a nutshell, just for those who may not be aware, and then we'll move on to a little bit on the grazing with free cow traffic, please.
Yeah, so basically, indoors, I think most people know this. We work on a PMR, which is a partial mixed ration. It's fed at the feed fence, and when we say PMR, it's because we normally feed -7 kilos. So you feed, -7 kilos of milk. So then we get the rest inside in the robot. So it's just to get them to travel to the robot.
Yeah.
What I do is completely different. At the moment I have cows on silage and on grass. They're balancing between the both. It's probably the toughest time of the year to manage, when you're just you're trying to get out and whatever, and you're leaving cows out. They need a bit of an appetite, and you need a bit of an edge on them, etc. So, but you want to make sure your cows are properly fed and nutritionally fed the whole time as well.
Yeah.
Grazing, typically young fresh grass, and we'll talk about the type of grass you feed. It's very important you don't feed grass that we call too strong in Ireland. I'm looking. We measure our grass, so like what I look to feed is covers, and I don't know, they change in different jurisdictions, depending where you are, but
right.
I think in New Zealand they discard what you don't eat. So what we normally like to feed in Ireland is what we call between about 1,300 kilograms of dry matter per hectare to 1,500 kilograms of dry matter per hectare. I don't like feeding grass stronger than 1,500 kilograms, because it's going to affect your protein big time. It's going to affect your yield. It slows down your rotation. basically makes it takes cows longer to walk through it, and all you're doing is creating a bigger problem for yourself down the line. So with those paddocks over 1,500 kilograms of dry matter, I would take them out for bales, and then under 1,300 or 1,250, if at a push 1,300 would be kind of ideal. I tend not to. You wouldn't graze below that because you're just going around the farm too quickly, you know.
Okay.
And again, it's about balance. It's about type of cow. We would have a different type of cow. I mean, when I was out in Saudi, we had cows a ton weight that were giving 14,000 litres. When I was there back in the day, we had a 41 litre rolling herd average, you know, day in, day out. Like, and it's a completely different type of cow. Those cows are doing a different job. They're for, you know, liquid milk primarily, and they're just not designed to walk long distances. You know, they're not.
Well, this is a nice little lead on, and it's not me trying to be smart. It's a question come in. Do you ever zero graze?
I have in the past. Yes, many moons ago. Actually, not when I had a robot, but I did it when I was milking in a parlour. I have zero grazed, and yeah, look, I'm not here to. It is an extra job to go out and bring the grass in. I would probably look to zero graze if I couldn't get out. So if I was, you know, short of silage or something like that, I'd use it as a sticking plaster and stuff like that. But you know, if it's part of your system, it's part of your system. You know, but it's not part of mine at the moment. But I've had experience of zero grazers, and again, there's a bit of management towards that. Keeping cows, you don't want to overload them. You can have problems if you overload them with acidosis and stuff like that. Like, so you always need a kind of a good fiber source when, you know, cows tend to hoover it down. Rather than graze, maybe, you know.
Yes. Yeah. So with your robot of choice, I think you only have to buy Lely when you were working for Lely. You had no choice in the matter.
I wouldn't work for anyone else.
And free cow traffic is a philosophy for Lely, of course.
Yes.
Can you explain that with the grazing concept?
I suppose, look, what is free cow traffic? Because look, it's just three random words stuck together. It's just, what it basically is that our cows have access to the robot at any time they choose, right? So my cow can leave a paddock at any stage and land back to the robot. There is no pre-selection system in her way. So if she decides she wants to get to the robot, then she's going to end up in the robot. The reason theory behind that is, you know, if a cow has an itch to scratch and she just wants to get to the robot, let her at it.
Yeah.
And I think why grazing works so well with cows is, if you think about cows, and I'm going to borrow, another vet said this to me, Martin Kavanagh, one time, said, like, they're slow moving prey animals is what they are, right? So they move slowly. So if a cow is in a long distance away, you know, she ain't just going to go up to the robot on a whim. Or
I thought that was one of yours, actually, Brian. I'm slightly disappointed.
That's okay. I credit Martin with that. I'm not that bright. It ain't brains that got me here. I can assure you of that. But like, there's two things. Like, they're slow moving is the first thing. So they don't just either get off of a cubicle inside and going to visit the robot on a whim, because like, their cows are lazy, hence the expression, you know, they are lazy, like, and they're couch potatoes, really. So like, they're very designed, like when they go down to a paddock, what we want them to do is, when they go to a paddock, that their average stay in the paddock will be 6 to 8 hours or 6 to 12 hours, or, you know, they stay that range of time, that they're not down to the paddock, back up again, whatever. Because remember, they're slow movers, and like, they like to eat, they're ruminants. So in order to ruminate, you have to rest. And cows are lazy, and they like to look after themselves, and good cows look after themselves very well. And that's why, you know, to quote Jordan Malloy here, it actually nearly works better. And that's some statement on grass, and it, you know, even indoor, you know what I mean? So that's free cow traffic. The cow gets the robot at any time she wishes, and she lies down anytime she wishes, and she feeds anytime she wishes. So she manages her own time budget.
And we'll see that now in this next slide, where you've got the different pastures and the ABCs, etc. Yeah,
so typically
very simple.
Yeah, so typically what we do, it's an ABC system, right? That's the most commonly used system in Ireland, ABC grazing. Now we'll touch on it again later on. You have different things. You have ABC with C indoors. You've in the past we had limited. AB can work limited, but it's not as good as ABC. And ABC, so you have 3 blocks. You divide your farm out into 3 blocks. They don't have to be equal size. That's another myth. Your farm, like another myth that I need to bust here, is your farm yard does not have to be in the center of the block. You haven't visited my farm yet. You might do next time you're in Ireland. But my farm yard is actually in the very corner of the block. So, you know, if I looked at it, I remember when I first started with Lely, we were actually saying, would it even be suitable for grazing? That was 7 years ago. No, we just say, yeah, of course it's suitable.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's it. So we have 3 blocks in A, B, and C. What you do is you allocate. Cows can go to a block based on time of day, right? So you've got a grazeway there that is the link between the cows and the robot. So the cows can go in past the grazeway, you know, to the robot anytime they want, and they're let out at any time to either of the 3 blocks. So yeah, here you have AB is 12 hours per paddock, and you know, we did AB back in the day. We don't do as any of it now. I don't think we start up any farms AB. There's still some farms out there that do AB. I think the problem with an AB farm is that, you know, when you've only got 2 opportunities of a gate time, and cows have a great circadian rhythm, right? So they've got a great internal clock, and they actually know when you're changing your gate. So you change your gate time, you change your gates, you change your paddock based on time of day, and it should always be the same time every day. You don't vary the times, and cows get to know that very quickly. And the stronger movers in the herd, the more dominant cows, they tend to be the ones that are first at that grazeway change, and the lazier cows, you know, maybe hang back, and they might miss a grazeway, and they might miss a grazing on an ABC system, so they might skip out B altogether, but be the first cows into C, that kind of thing. So ABC is a system I do personally at home. AB with C inside, that's quite popular in Ireland. We have a good.
Shall we have a look at your farm?
Yeah,
got quite a bit of information on there, but a nice picture as well.
Yeah, so this is my farm. So as small as it is, as we can see, so if you're looking at that picture on the extreme left, you can actually see there's no slurry thing back there, and there's a hedge and a tree. So that's actually the field outside that. So it's the closest field to my robot, is not even mine, right? So that's actually my neighbour's field.
Really?
So yeah. So that's not even mine. And then, so if you're looking at my blocks there, so block A is opened at 6 p.m. So the way we normally would split a farm would be typically, and look, it's not set in stone, it's 40, 40, 20. So 2 blocks, 40% of the farm, and the smaller block would be 20%, and that's usually my nighttime block. So if we just start with that block opens at 6 p.m. Okay?
Right.
So cows that are milked after 6 p.m. or cows that come to the grazeway after 6 p.m., they're going to be let out there. Okay? And then I have a gate change at 2 a.m. And the reason we have a gate change at 2 a.m. is to stimulate that nighttime milking for the cow, because when you think about a robotic system, be it indoor or be it grazing, it doesn't really matter. You have to think and design in terms of movement, right? Milkings are actually incidental. You know, if you get movement, the milkings will follow. And that doesn't matter if you're indoor or outdoor. You need to think about, how's my cow going to move through this system? And simplicity is always the best, so you keep your gate times consistent. And because we want to stimulate cows, and cows, you know, they tend to rest more at night, etc., that nighttime block is the smallest block, so it's 20% of the farm. It's actually less than my own farm, and it's 20%. And you give the cow gets the smallest allocation of grass in that one, so that at 2 a.m. she's stimulated to say, hey, there's a fresh block of grass open down in block B, let's go down and get it.
Yeah. And you mentioned cows traveling. Did you say earlier yours travel up to 800 meters?
Yeah, the furthest I have is 800 meters, but we've cows in Ireland traveling. I mean, that's
What would they
really
go
short.
to?
We've well over a kilometer, 1.8, I think, in one place they're traveling.
Really?
You know, that's
And
over
that doesn't, due to the genetics and the type of animal, no problem. They can do that all day long.
No, again, you must have a cow fit for purpose. I mean, yeah.
Hmm.
But bear in mind, she's only walking there once a day. So, you know, you're varying it around. So you'd have a long walk and then you'd have a short walk on the other side of it. So, yeah.
Yeah. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see the milking schedule, which I know you like this this slide, Brian.
Yeah. So look, this is just like milkings per hour. So this is shows like that. This was a screen grab taken on, you know, back in the main grazing season. So like there's a nice flow of milkings throughout the day. You know, you don't get a drop off in milking because again, when you have a robot system, it's just very important that you have that movement of cows moving through the system, that you don't have this big collection of cows behind the robot.
Yeah.
So typically I don't want to see any more than, you know, 40 minutes to an hour's worth of cows behind the robot at any one time. You know?
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've got a bit of information now on nighttime moving, and one of the questions that's come in is those block times that you had, do they ever change?
No.
No, they're fixed.
Okay. They're fixed. I mean, I know when they are. The cows know where they are, and like they don't change for me or they don't change for the cows. And the reason they don't change for me is I can't remember if we had a slide to cover this. It's about my daily working routine, and we can get to that maybe later on. They don't change because it's my daily working routine, but the cows know it. It's very important to get that nighttime moving, to get the cows moving during the middle of the night. If there's a light on over the grazeway or in the yard that they can see it, you know, have cows coming on the shortest walk at night. Don't have them coming from the longest. It's okay to send them away to the longest walk at night because they keep walking until they get to the paddock. I always describe it as kind of like an airport. You know, when you get off the plane, sorry, and oops, I'm just after hitting my laptop there. You know, when you get off the plane, my enthusiasm for nighttime milking. When you get off the plane and you're walking to passport control, you know, you go left and you go right and you're following a corridor and like there's areas that are gated off or whatever. And you just, you go left or right. If you had to look down at the schematic and try to figure it out, you wouldn't find it. But because you've no options, you keep walking until you find passport control. And a cow is no different. She's going to keep walking until she finds a paddock, right? Yeah. So I would be sending her at 2 a.m., you know, to the furthest away block at that stage. Just let her off. But at that 2 a.m., when they're coming in, I want that from the shortest block. So they're going out at 6 p.m. to the closest block to the farm.
And we've got on there the grazeway. Can we on the next slide just have a look at this and explain what the grazeway is for some people who may not be aware?
It's very hard to gauge from a slide. Like, I mean, an ABC, I always say this, like ABC is very hard to describe and it's very easy to live with. You know, it's complex. It's a bit like my wife. It's very complex person, but very easy to live with at the same time. You know, it's, you know, so what we're looking at here is the grazeway is in the middle. So when the cow walks to the grazeway, this is a cow here. The grazeway was select based on the time of day. She's going to paddock A, paddock B, and paddock C. So there's a there's two selection gates there in front of the three selection gates in front of the grazeway, one for each direction, right? It funnels her out so she can only end up in that direction. What's crucial here is a cow can return from any block at any time. That is not time dependent. So she can, in theory, walk out to paddock A and walk back in 5 minutes later, in theory. Right. Usually that doesn't happen, but in theory, she's free to do that. So she's restricted into where she can go out, but she can come back at any time she wishes.
Right. And then the paddocks are allocated.
Yeah.
For them to go into.
So again, like the way we would make it up is like your cows intakes, depending who you talk to, 18 kilos a day or to 20 kilos a day or whatever. So we take off whatever we're feeding in the robot. So let's say I'm feeding 3 kilos to that cow in the robot. You minus 3 kilos and you feed, you know, you feed 15 kilos of grass per day. So you divide that up with your 40, 40, 20. Then there's a little bit more to it than that. If I went into, I think everybody would just log off if I started, you know, to get a bit deeper down. You walk your paddock. So what's very important here is that you monitor the amount of grass you have available, and you do what we call a grass budget. So once a year, once a week, I will walk the farm. Maybe twice a week in peak road, I will walk the paddock. So I have all my paddocks numbered. We have a great system here in Ireland called Pasture Base, where I just have all my paddocks. It's a spreadsheet of all my paddocks in, and I walk around. And you can either use a plate meter. Some people they clip the grass. They clip a square meter, and they weigh it, and you guesstimate the dry matter. Or some people just eyeball it. I mean, if you're at it long enough, if you're at it long enough, you know what you call 1,000 kilos per hectare, a ton of dry matter per hectare, 1.2, 1.3, etc., etc. You just know it over time. It becomes automatic, and you allocate then based on the yield of grass. So what's really, really key here is your pre-grazing yield. And I've said that before, you know, greater than 1,250 kilos if you can, 1,400 kilos of dry matter per hectare, optimal, and anything over 1,500 kilos, you're better off to take it out in bales.
Yeah.
And the received wisdom in Ireland with a lot of people is that 1,500 kilos of dry matter is usually, if you have a schematic of, or you have a picture of a grass plant later on, it's when that fourth leaf starts to emerge on the plant. And the received wisdom in Ireland now is that you are better off to cut it at 1,500 kilograms of dry matter per hectare, bale it. Even if you have to feed that bale 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later to cow, it's more efficient to do that because you're getting the new growth coming after that cut.
Yeah, and some nice tracks here. What advice would you have for the tracks? It's not just a simple case of opening the gate and letting them go.
No. So look, the tracks, good drainage on them is the first thing. You want to have the sides scrope away. That you need a kind of a camber on the tracks so water is not resting on the tracks, because you could have problems with cows' hooves and if you have water on the tracks. So you want a nice camber in it that the water can flow off it. A track doesn't have to be very wide. 2 meters is normally sufficient. Cows tend just to use one track anyway. 2 meters is enough for 2 cows to pass if they want to.
Do you ever share a track with farm traffic as well as the cows?
That's actually vital to setting up a farm. So as part of my job with Lely, I go into farms and I look, the first thing I look is how's this farm going to operate as a farm. So you have the farmer there, and he or she will have to get their silage out, and they will have to get the silage in and their slurry out. That's basic requirements. So you have to look at how's my farm going to set up. So some of the laneways will have to be serviced by tractors, and cows will have to share that too. And look, there's ways and means of doing it. You just have it wide enough and make sure your operators, are mindful that cows have right away in this farm. Again, if you're doing intensive operations in the farm, if you're putting in silage or putting out slurry, you might just choose to put the cows in for a few hours. These jobs are done faster and faster every year. You might have them inside for 3 or 4 hours. Just budget that in. I mean, it's all common sense stuff, really, but it has to operate as a farm.
And what about water troughs?
Water troughs are so important. I mean, milk is mostly made up of water and charge 4 cents a litre for every drop of it they're taking out. But you need milk for water. You need milk for cow health. I like to keep the troughs in the field, right? I like to have troughs in the field. I don't think, like, near the exit to the field is obviously preferable, near the exit. But look, once cows are trained to the system, you could have a water trough just about anywhere and will work. Just what you really need to know is, like, if I have a paddock and I'm getting 3 grazings out of a paddock, that my water trough is available for the 3 grazings. You don't put it down at the other end of the paddock where she can't get it, like, or halfway down when you're only going to be grazing a third of the way down, the first time you're grazing it. Some people say keep them on the roadways. I think you're better off when cows get on the roadways that they just head to the where the milking robot is. So I generally, in my own farm, I only have water trucks in the paddock with the cow, and in the robot, in the shed, with the robot.
Yeah.
And everywhere else, then, when she's on the, she just walks up. I get to there, I drink my water, I go back to the field, I have my water again.
So here we are, the image you've been waiting for, Brian, and I guess we can't overemphasize enough about the grass. So you're the expert. Tell us what you see.
Well, I'm a very weak expert.
And I've got some more questions for you, but I think we've only got this 2 more slides, so we'll do the slides and then we'll have a couple of minutes with the questions, if that's all right.
So you want to feed at the 3-leaf stage. You don't want to be, when you see that dead leaf at the bottom, like that dead leaf is actually not really much good to the cow. So you want to feed at the 3-leaf stage is key. Again, 1250 to 1450, and you must know what your farm. What's very important about measuring grass, and this is really important. It's key to know what rate you're grazing your grass. Your grass is growing, right? So if my farm is growing, I mean, in peak growth, if you're really lucky, you can be growing 90, plus kilograms of dry matter per hectare per day, right? So my paddock that has, 700 kilos today, if that's growing, 100 a day, that's going to be 1,400 in 7 days' time. I'm going to have to be into that paddock. So you really have to be anticipating what's going to happen next, and they always say the covers the covers, what I call the 600-700 kilo covers, are the one to watch. Where they're going to be in a week's time. So what you actually try to do is you try to plan where your cows are going to be for the next 7-8 days. If you have more than 7 days of grass available to you, you have too much grass. You like to get 3 days per paddock. You have to use a strip wire. It doesn't work as well without a strip wire. You operate a back fence because you only do that if you're taking more than 3 days per paddock. If you're on to 4 or 5, because you don't want to pick in regrowths. 3 days is optimal. 4 is not the end of the world, but 3 days is optimal per paddock. Yeah. And that's how you gauge your paddock size. It's the number of your cows versus your pre-grazing yield versus you want to get them out in 3 days. Again, for 3 days, you over allocate the first day. You give them a little smaller the second day and a little smaller the third day because they're going to be picking back going over. And I cannot emphasize enough that you have to measure your grass. You have to know what your farm is growing per day. You have to know the growth rate, and you have to know how much grass you have in stock. So, but actually, when you're grazing, when you're getting up in the morning, you're changing 2 fences in the morning, 1 fence in the evening. You're walking a lot of your farm in a way. So you've got a good overview of what's happening. And what we also have here in Ireland is we have peer groups. So it's a lot easier if you have somebody that comes to you maybe once a month, a friend or something like that, because just to say, I think that's 1,500. No, actually, I reckon it's for that. Just to keep your eye in. It's like golf.
and getting the cow to the robot. Any problems? What makes the cow go to the robot? Slightly loaded question.
Yeah. So I mean, there's 3 reasons a cow will leave a paddock, right? The first reason she will leave it, in my view, and all this is only my view, by the way, is what do we say? Grass supports. Does it support 17, 18, maybe tops 20, 21 liters, depending on the quality of grass you have. So if your cow is doing 24, 25, 30, 35, 40 liters maybe, well, she's going to need supplementation in the robot. That's where you guys come in with concentrates, right? And she's going to need some level of concentrate feeding in the robot, right? And a cow, it's like a smoker. When she needs that energy, and she'll go to the end of the earth, to get that energy. If you see cows actually, at the back end of the year, or if grass is really lush, you can see them eating the sides of the ditches, where their stemmy grass is, because they're very good at knowing what they want. So she needs that energy in the robot. She will travel to get it. The second reason they leave is, like, if you got a cow, being milked twice a day, she's only so much capacity in her udder. She's going to go, burden of milk. She wants to get milk. It's more comfortable, for her. And the third reason she moves is if she runs out of grass, she's vote with her feet. She's not going to stay there, She might be lying down while she's ruminating inside in a bare field when the grass has run out. But as soon as she stands up and looks for some more to eat, she's going to vote with her feet. So I suppose one of the questions I get asked is, will my cows come back in? And that's never been a problem, really, once they get used to the system.
Yeah. Well, what we'll do is we'll leave those sort of tips up there, typical day on your farm. We have got quite a few questions to get through. So I will just start randomly. How many cows do you have to fetch in for any of the blocks? So collect cows.
Mostly, and I'm going to say there's 0 to maybe, you might get cows actually peak breeding season, you get a few cows messing around below the bottom if they're in heat, jumping on each other, etc. But for the most part, you know, unless you go on to change a fence early, you know, so like in the morning I get up, you know, 6:30, 7, and if I get up really early for work, there might be cows left in block A, which is my nighttime block. There could be 2 or 3 there. You just push them out in front of you. You're there to change the fence or else close the wire anyway. So you just do that. But ordinarily, I wouldn't be sweeping cows at all. Maybe in the first year you will be sweeping, but once the cows get the system, no.
Okay, thank you. A couple of more questions. Our cows don't like the soiled grass. What management do you do to encourage grazing?
So soiled grass, I suppose that's where you've dung paths and stuff like that. So a thing is, like, first thing is slurry management. I don't pull out slurry unless it's really very, very bare. I'm talking about less than 1.5 centimeters or 2.5 centimeters of grass, sorry, an inch of grass. I wouldn't pull out slurry after that. I top my paddocks. I have a topper. I don't know, do you call it a topper over in the UK?
Yeah, makes sense to us.
Yeah, I top my grass out, and that kind of controls dung paths as well. And you will see farms actually mid-season get a bit rank. So every paddock will need a mechanical intervention at some stage during the year, right?
Yeah.
What some people will say, look, you know, can you not graze that, you know, take it out as bales? But if it's that rank type of sour grass out of dung paths, if they don't want to eat it, to my mind, putting it into a bale ain't going to make it any more palatable for the cow. So I just rather would top it out. I mean, you're putting your peas and case back into the ground, you're recycling it again. I don't see it as the end of the world.
Okay. We'll do 2 or 3 more. They're coming in thick and fast, Brian. Do you ever feel vulnerable to the robot breaking down?
Because I've won?
Or because it's a robot?
Yeah, because it's a robot. Yeah, it's a good question.
Or both, maybe.
So if you take it in a parlor context, right? If you're milking parlor, and I milked in parlor for years, breaks down. It's always going to break down when you've all your cows to milk. So you go to press the button, it doesn't work, or you've no vacuum, or something happens, right? And it's a rare enough event. In a robot, it's a rare enough event as well. It's a very rare event. But if my robot breaks down, guess what? About 90% of my cows are milked. So only 10% of my cows need to be milked. And I always operate my robot that I've at least minimum 10% free time in my robot. So it has time to, by the time somebody comes out to fix my robot, maybe there might be 20% of my cows need to be milked, or maybe 30% of my cows. And again, it's such a rare occurrence. So no, I don't feel vulnerable. It's a question, because if it does go down, unfortunately, like 90-95% of my cows are milked anyway.
Yeah. Okay. There's a farmer here looking for some tips. So any tips for a grazing higher yielding herd with cows giving 35 litres plus, aiming to get decent grass intake with buffer feeding in the barn?
I suppose what you need to do is you need to get good graze outs. What I would do is, if you're buffer feeding in the barn, I would keep the barn as a complete separate block anyway. You know, that they get silage at a certain time of day is what I would say. And the other thing I would do, if you want them to really, you know, eat the grass down and graze out really well, focus on your pre-grazing yield. Don't send them into grass too strong. And I've been on farms and say, oh, my cows like strong grass, and gee, my cows wouldn't eat, you know. And if you want to know, like, if you pick up a clump of grass with your hand, take it up by the roots, if you can put 3 fists on top of another, you have too much grass there for the cows. You know, you know, if you have more than 3 fistfuls of grass, you know, every fistful is nearly 1,000 kgs of dry matter per hectare. So if you can, sorry, 500 kgs. Well, my maths has just gone 500 kgs. So if you have 3, that's 1500 kgs plus. So you have too much. So for that person, I would just say, you know, try to have where you're buffer feeding a separate location on a robot, a separate different time of the day, and focus on your pre-grazing yield to have the right type of grass in front of it to get your graze out.
Last one, and we're going to let you go home, Brian, because we know you've stayed at the office tonight for us, which we're very grateful for. This one came in early. It's quite a long one, but I think it's a good one, so we'll end with this one. We graze on robots during the day and house at night. We find it works well during spring and early summer. Later in the summer, when flies become a problem, cows prefer to stay out in the fresh breeze, then come in to be milked where more flies are, meaning visits can drop. Do you have the same issue? If so, how do you get around it?
I don't really. I would prefer, if I'm hearing right, I would actually prefer to send my cows out at night and have them in during the day.
Yeah. Okay.
I think there's been some research that this cows actually prefer to be out at night. So again, like, you know, have my graze way set up that the cows are going out at 2 a.m. You know, and they can come in. Like if you're in that hot and you like, if you flies, you must control the flies anyway. You must put on some topical administration for the flies. But like, I would rather have them maybe indoor in the heat of the day if that's your system, and have them out at night. And again, like I send my cows out to the biggest. My cows get the biggest feed at 2 a.m. So that's my biggest block. So they go to 2 a.m. From 2 a.m. They're going from that up from 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. Remember, or 11 a.m. Sorry, and they eat that block down, you know. So I would have them out at night. Would be mine.
Okay. Your tip. Fantastic. You've made it through to the end.
Yeah, I hope people made it through as well.
They have, because the questions they are still coming. So what we'll do is we'll answer those questions offline. We'll grab you maybe one day in the week, Brian, and then get some answers sent out to everybody. Yeah, we've kept you long enough. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much. It's been I've worked with you for a number of years, and I've learned lots about you and your farm. So thank you for sharing that. It's been fantastic.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And for those watching still, you will have seen there's dates for the next webinars coming up. So yeah, hopefully you can tune in for those. Thank you for making the effort and joining us this evening, keeping Brian and I company. Much appreciated. So thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening. And yeah, it's soon going to be the weekend.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you very much. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
Cheers.